The first time the kennel lights flickered off at night, Maria Collins stayed sitting on the concrete floor long after the dogs had settled, her back against the chain-link fence, her hands still smelling like disinfectant and kibble, wondering how many good intentions a person was allowed to have before the world finally told them it wasn't enough. She had trained dozens of service dogs with patience that bordered on devotion, teaching them to steady shaking hands, to interrupt panic spirals, to guide bodies that could no longer trust their own balance, yet she herself lived in a one-room apartment with a mattress on the floor and a stack of unpaid bills she never seemed to reach the bottom of. She trained miracles for other people, but she could never afford one for herself. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and quiet acts of goodness that don't make headlines, take a moment right now to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope today, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from, because stories like this travel farther when we carry them together. Maria's days began before sunrise, her alarm ringing at 4:30 every morning, not because she liked waking early, but because the dogs needed structure, and structure was the first lesson she taught them. She worked at a non-profit training center on the edge of town, a place that survived on donations, old equipment, and volunteers who rotated in and out like seasons. The dogs came from shelters, anxious and unsure, and left months later focused, steady, and ready to change someone's life. Maria knew each one by heart, their fears, their quirks, the way some flinched at loud noises while others leaned instinctively into human touch. What no one seemed to know was that she trained them while her own hand sometimes trembled from untreated nerve damage, a souvenir from a car accident years earlier that had taken her savings and her insurance in the same breath. A service dog would have helped her immensely, but the cost was a wall she could never climb. Every month, Maria made the same calculations, subtracting groceries from rent, electricity from medication, always deciding that she could endure a little more discomfort if it meant keeping the lights on at the kennel. She wore the same worn jacket through winter, patched at the elbows, and drove an old sedan that groaned every time it started. Still, she never missed a training session, never rushed a dog through a lesson, never complained when overtime went unpaid. To her, the work was sacred. She believed that if she could help enough people stand again, breathe again, sleep again, then maybe her own pain would feel smaller. The biker started showing up on Thursdays. At first, Maria noticed the sound before the man himself, the low rumble of a motorcycle rolling into the gravel lot, a sound that seemed out of place among the barking dogs and fluttering volunteer vests. The bike was old but meticulously cared for, black with chrome edges that caught the sun. The man riding it was broad-shouldered, his beard threaded with gray, his leather jacket creased with years of use. His name, she would later learn, was Jack Turner, but at first he was just another visitor standing awkwardly near the fence, hands in his pockets, watching the dogs train with an intensity that suggested he was looking for something he hadn't yet named. Jack had come because his younger brother, a veteran struggling with severe PTSD, had been placed on a waiting list for a service dog. The list was long, and the uncertainty was heavy. Jack had always been the one who fixed things, who showed up when life broke down, but this was a problem he couldn't solve with tools or money alone. So he started visiting the training center, partly to understand the process, partly because watching the dogs gave him a rare sense of calm. He noticed Maria immediately, not because she stood out, but because she never stopped moving. She corrected gently, rewarded consistently, and spoke to the dogs with a kind of quiet respect that made them trust her completely. Over the weeks, Jack learned the rhythms of the place without ever being told. He saw Maria stay late to clean kennels when volunteers left early. He saw her rub her wrist absent-mindedly when she thought no one was watching. He noticed the way she always declined the leftover pizza offered by others, packing it up instead to take home for later. None of this came from conversation, because neither of them were people who filled silence easily. It came from observation, from the slow accumulation of details that only patience reveals. One afternoon, a dog named Oliver froze during a training exercise, overwhelmed by noise from a nearby construction site. Maria knelt beside him, grounding him with steady hands and calm breathing, guiding him through the moment without force. Jack watched from a distance, something tightening in his chest. He realized then that Maria was doing for these dogs what no one had done for him when his brother came home broken. She was staying, fully present, even when it was hard. Change rarely announces itself. It arrives quietly, disguised as routine. For Maria, it came in the form of a folded flyer left on her desk about a fundraiser ride, a charity motorcycle event Jack had organized under the name of a local riders group. The proceeds, it said, would support service dog training. She smiled at the thought, grateful but not surprised. People like Jack always found ways to help others. What she didn't know was that the fundraiser had a second, unspoken purpose. Jack had learned, through overheard conversations and careful questions, that Maria herself qualified for a service dog. He had also learned the cost. The number sat in his mind like an accusation. He knew Maria would never accept direct charity, not without resistance, not without feeling like she was taking something meant for someone else. So he didn't ask. He planned. The day of the ride was cold and bright, the kind of day that sharpened colors and made engines sound louder. Dozens of bikes lined the road, riders from different walks of life united by a shared cause. Maria stood near the fence, overwhelmed by the turnout, her eyes shining as she watched the procession roll out. She had no idea that the donations pouring in, the envelopes and digital transfers and spare cash, were quietly exceeding expectations. Weeks passed. The dogs trained. Life continued. Maria's pain flared more often, her grip weakening on bad days. She adapted the way she always did, adjusting, enduring. Then one evening, as she finished locking up, she found Jack waiting by his bike, holding an envelope thick enough to bend. Inside was not a check, not exactly, but a letter from the training center's board, explaining that a special fund had been created, anonymous and unrestricted, designated to cover the full cost of training and placing a service dog with one of their own trainers. The name on the final line was hers. Maria sat down on the curb because her legs would not hold her. The world narrowed to the sound of her own breathing and the weight of years she had carried alone. She understood immediately what this meant, who had done this, even without names attached. It wasn't charity. It was recognition. It was someone seeing her not just as a giver, but as someone worthy of receiving. The training process felt different this time. Maria stood on the other side of the leash, learning to trust support instead of always providing it. The dog matched to her was a golden retriever named Hazel, steady and intuitive, trained to brace when Maria's balance faltered, to retrieve items when her hands failed her, to interrupt pain-induced spirals with grounding pressure. Every lesson was emotional, not because it was hard, but because it was finally hers. Jack watched from a respectful distance as Maria changed. He saw her posture straighten, her fatigue ease, her smile return in ways he hadn't seen before. He never claimed credit. He didn't need to. The look on Maria's face the first time Hazel guided her safely across an icy parking lot was enough. If this story has touched your heart even a little, if it's reminded you that quiet goodness still exists in the world, please take a moment near the end of this video to like it, share it, and let the algorithm know that stories of compassion deserve to be seen. On the day Hazel officially graduated, the kennel filled with volunteers, riders, staff, and dogs past and present. Maria stood in the center, her hand resting on Hazel's head, overwhelmed not by gratitude, but by belonging. She realized then that the greatest gift Jack had given her wasn't the dog, or the money, or even the relief from pain. It was the feeling of being seen after years of invisibility. Before this story ends, we ask you to leave a comment sharing what part of this journey stayed with you the most, because your words help keep stories like Maria's alive. As the sun set behind the training center, casting long shadows across the yard, Maria locked the gate with Hazel at her side and walked toward a future that no longer felt like something she had to endure alone, but something she could finally live.